Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 268 had two recent fight announcements. You have Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 2, as well as Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler. And those are the only two fights announced for UFC 268 so far. So I wanted to make a video about my dream card for UFC 268. And I'm going to give you a matchup at the end that I think would make this the best fight card ever. I don't know if it has a high probability of actually happening, but the UFC has so many fights they have to make towards the end of this year. We're going to get some great cards. So first off, the two matchups that are already announced, I made individual videos for them. Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 2. I love that fight. Colby's, gave Kamaru his toughest test in their first fight until Usman eventually broke his jaw and then stopped him in the fifth round. I thought it was 2-2 going into that fifth round, and I love this fight. I think, I've talked about the welterweight division, and I've said there's no one guy in the division that has a concrete open and shut case to fight for the title next. I was fine with anybody really getting the title shot in the welterweight division because nobody really 100% deserves it. But if there was a fight that I was most anticipating, it had to be Usman versus Covington too. And I can't wait for that fight. And I've already done a video for it by itself. You guys can go check that out on my channel. Also, Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler. Also done another video on it by itself. But just real quick, that is an amazing fight. I am so excited. This is the fight that the MMA fans wanted and campaigned for. And the fact that it's finally going to happen, I'm so excited for. I don't see how that fight could suck. Now, to get into some of my matchups for this fight card to make it one of the best fight cards the UFC has ever put on, first, I'll give you a bantamweight matchup. I want to see TJ Dillashaw versus Rob Font happen at UFC 268. And I just think this fight makes so much sense. The division is kind of tied up right now. You have Aljamain Sterling and Petr Yan not fighting till UFC 267, I believe it is, at the end of October. So TJ Dillashaw, I know he had that knee problem, and I don't know how long he's going to be out from that. But depending on what goes on in that Yan fight, I don't want him sitting out till spring of next year. I want to see him active. I think Rob Font is the perfect matchup for him right now. Rob Font's coming off that spectacular win over Cody Garbrandt, and I just would really love to see those two guys matched up. And I think that is just such an important bantamweight fight, and that can be for the next title shot. I know people are going to say TJ Dillashaw already deserves the title shot. He never lost the belt, and I kind of agree with you. I get it, but at the same time, let him fight at least two fights, returning from a PED suspension to earn himself a right to fight for the bantamweight title again. And I just really think Rob Font's the perfect matchup. If he can beat Rob Font, he's earned his shot. He's beat Sandhagen and Rob Font. And then in turn, if Rob Font beats Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw back to back, he's earned his title shot. So he should be fighting the winner of Sterling and Yan next anyway. So I think that'd be a great fight. I think that would be, a very amazing pay-per-view opener potentially if the rest of these fights were to come to fruition. Who knows if it's actually going to happen? I just know the UFC is targeting Madison Square Garden, and they love to stack that fight card. It's not unprecedented for them to have, one of the best fight cards in MSG, so I'm hoping some of these fights come to fruition. So this next fight, you guys have already heard me talk about. I've been campaigning for it for months, ever since their last fights happened. I want to see Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson in a 5-round fight at UFC 268. I just think it makes so much sense. Both guys are just cardio machines. Tony Ferguson's coming in on a 3-fight losing streak. Nate Diaz is on a 2-fight losing streak. And I just think the matchup is a fight that many people have been wanting to see for years. I mean, Tony Ferguson, just the way he fights, and he's just so durable and so tough. And he has a very similar style to Nate Diaz. And, both guys I think would match up very well. I think it's a fight that would draw a lot of fans in. We know that Nate Diaz is a draw. We've seen it. UFC headlined a pay-per-view in MSG with Nate Diaz a couple years ago against Masvidal. And I just think this fight, there's never been a time that this fight has made more sense. And it can happen at 155. It can happen at 170. And I just need to see this fight. So I really want to see Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson. So the other two fights that I have for you guys, really want to see. And this is a fight that has been talked about for I think it's been 2 years now, over 2 years. And it's a fight I believe should have already happened. So this fight is Leon Edwards versus Jorge Masvidal. Ever since they both fought, I want to say it was 2019, early 2019. Ever since Leon and Masvidal both fought and won on the same card, then they had that little backstage scuffle. Everyone has wanted to see this fight. Masvidal went up to Leon behind backstage, punched him a couple times, and everyone thought after seeing that and the UFC capturing that on video that this fight was definitely going to happen next because there would be a lot of promotion behind it. It would draw some fans, and ever since then, Jorge Masvidal has become a star. Ever since Jorge Masvidal knocked out Darren Till, then went on to flying knee Ben Askren, Jorge Masvidal has become a huge star for the UFC. And I think this fight doesn't make perfect sense right now, but I just think it needs to happen. And why not now? Leon Edwards, a guy who's won so many fights in a row in the welterweight division, I've said multiple times he needs to beat, one of these top 10 guys to really cement his case to fight for a title next. And who better than Jorge Masvidal, who's fought Kamaru Usman twice, coming off back-to-back losses to Kamaru Usman. His last win was against Nate Diaz. And I think Jorge Masvidal is a guy who, I know a lot of people saying, he's ducking this guy, ducking that guy. But at the end of the day, he's taken tough fight after tough fight. Ben Askren was a nightmare matchup for him back then. People said Ben Askren was going to take him to the ground and, grind him out. He fought Damian Maia years ago. He fought Wonderboy Thompson in his prime, arguably. So I think the UFC needs to come together and somehow make this fight. Side note, if this fight does not come together, I need to see Leon Edwards versus Gilbert Burns. And I think that fight makes a little bit more sense in the grand scheme of the division. I think the winner of that fight could fight for the belt next. That would be a number one contender fight right there. But I still want to see the Leon versus Masvidal fight. I think that fight has too much backstory to never, ever happen. And I just really want to see it, and I hope the UFC puts it together. So this last fight that I'm going to give you would, without a doubt, make this fight card. If all these fights came together, and even if we just had the two fights we know are confirmed right now, and they just threw this fight on top, I think it would still make it probably one of the best UFC fight cards on paper ever. And I don't know how likely it is to happen. I think there's a small chance, and I think there's precedent for it. Because right now, there's only one title fight on the card. The UFC has done at MSG before 3 title fights. Years ago, I think it was, maybe 1 year after they were allowed at MSG, they did GSP versus Michael Bisping for the middleweight championship. They did Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw for the bantamweight title, which was a big fight at the time. And they also did Joanna Jędrzejczyk against Rose Namajunas for a title too. So it wouldn't be unprecedented for them to put 2 title fights on this card, maybe even 3. Now, I know this is maybe a little bit unlikely because, Colby versus Kamaru is a pretty big fight in my opinion. But I would just love to see this fight, even if it was co-main. I mean, I think it would be a main event over Colby versus Kamaru Usman. But please, UFC, make this happen. This would be the greatest fight card of all time. Give me Israel Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker. I would love to see that fight. Robert Whittaker lost his title a couple years ago, was finished by Adesanya, and man, has he worked his way back, beating contender after contender. And it's just time. He beat Jared Cannonier last year. He beat Kelvin Gastelum this year. He has earned his title shot. Let's put Whittaker versus Adesanya on that MSG card. Adesanya is a guy who likes to stay active. He fought Vettori, I believe, was it May or June? I think it was June. He fought Vettori in June. He's going to want to fight before the end of the year. So why not put him on that November card? Now, I don't know how likely that is because the UFC would say, oh, well, this is two headliner fights between Usman and Colby, and then also Adesanya versus Whittaker 2 would be another good headliner for a pay-per-view. But I think there's a chance. MSG, they like to really stack the card. So please just throw that fight on there. I mean, who wouldn't love to see that? I'm so curious. I picked Whittaker in the first fight, and Adesanya just outclassed him, and it was a spectacular performance. I'm so curious if Whittaker has made the adjustments and maybe he tweaks his game plan going into the fight. He's seen Adesanya fight plenty of times since then. We've seen him lose to Jan Blachowicz. We've seen him fight Marvin Vettori. He's fought plenty of times since then against Paulo Costa as well. Can Whittaker make the adjustments and potentially beat Adesanya in the rematch? I would love to see it. I think it's a very intriguing fight now, especially considering Whittaker is a guy who's a lot of champions lose and then they complain, I want an immediate title shot, or they go win one fight and they're like, I want a title shot again. And Whittaker went out there and really beat up some guys. He beat Darren Till, he beat Jared Cannonier, and he beat Kelvin Gastelum. He has earned his way back to the middleweight title. So I really want to see that fight. Do me a favor, guys. Comment down below and let me know which of these fights that I suggested is your favorite. I'm genuinely curious. Don't forget to like the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.